Well, welcome to 2022, Dr. Renee. Happy New Year.
Hi, Dr. Olysha. I'm fine. Very, very excited. Happy to be here, starting our new podcast.
Yes, I'm so excited to start this new podcast too. And, with the new year and, new podcast, do you have any resolutions for 2022?
Well, I usually don't make resolutions because I'm very type A. So usually I'm going to do this today, regardless of, what month or what week it is. So I usually do start something. The only thing I might have to say is what I would not do. Like, I am not going to have a boba tea every day. So that might be like the extent of what I might do.
It's funny because I do make resolutions, but I tend to make the same ones every year. So maybe I should take your approach. Maybe I'll have more success.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I did introduce a line of high-end journals last year because of that whole situation. A lot of people have ideas and goals and resolutions that are never actually accomplished. So, of course, using the whole science behind it, science of psychology and personality, and how different personalities achieve differently and set goals differently. So with that journal, that might be something I'll make sure I give to you, slide it over the table.
Awesome. I'd love that.
Yep. Journal Smarter is the name of it. So everyone can follow me on Instagram to find it.
Well, Dr. Renee, as you know, we are launching this first episode on the first anniversary of the insurrection that took place January 6th, 2021. And as I was doing the research for this episode, I had a thought. Do you remember where you were on the day of the insurrection last year?
Yes. Oh my goodness. I was actually doing media commentary for the rally that was being, happening before that. And I was, analyzing Trump's body language and everyone that was there. So then when this happened, I was still doing the commentary and then had to immediately switch over to the riot that happened.
Wow. So you were right in the thick of it. So this will be really interesting.
Right.
To have your take on it.
Right. Yeah.
So I, was just working like I normally do, probably starting back up. I work in higher education, so this new semester is starting. And I remember I was just watching the news kind of pour in and friends were texting. And so I turned on this live stream just to watch it as I was working. And, Dr. Renee, honestly, I was expecting something like this to happen. How about you?
Oh, really? I was not expecting it. I was just really hoping for a very extremely peaceful transition. Like, let's just wrap this up and move on with our lives. So I was not expecting it at all.
Oh, yeah. I was totally expecting it. I was expecting actually probably something worse than what happened, if you can imagine that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You know me, I'm a little bit jaded with the political situation in our country. And so...
Which is why you ran for office, to create political change.
That's exactly right. And, probably for that reason, too, I follow this stuff a little, I've been following these topics for a while. So nothing really surprised me. But it was still shocking, if that makes sense.
Like, I can't believe this is really happening, like that kind of.
Right.
Like, I was expecting it, but yeah.
Really? Did my worst fears come to light? And, it's not just me. Other folks I know had similar fears. And, so there were some of us who were not too surprised. And so, as we talked about doing this episode and we talked about some of the ideas around it, I started doing some research on the actual insurrection and what happened. But I think I'd actually like to start with a timeline that led up to the events on January 6th, 2021. Okay. And as you mentioned, there was a rally called Stop the Steal that former President Trump attended. It was planned and advertised to protest the November 4th, 2020 election. And I just want to point out that the source material I'm using for the timeline comes from a really excellent piece by Stephen Harper on billmoyers.com. There's also another article from The Insider that includes an extensive day-to-day timeline, and then a recent piece from The Guardian by Hugo Lowell. And all the sources that we mention in this episode are linked on our website, provocativeconversationspodcast.com. And also, Dr. Renee, the story is still ongoing, as you know.
Yes.
Because the
yes.
trials are happening as we speak, and more information is coming to light every day. So, are you ready to jump into this timeline?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So, really, to talk about this event, we do have to go back a bit. And it does start most obviously on Election Day, November 4th, 2020, though really well before that. Trump was a loser and a sore loser at that. And I don't think that would come as a surprise to anyone. We know that he had been saying things to question the outcome of the election well before Election Day and using terms like rigged and stolen election and all other sorts of garbage to imply that no matter what, unless he won, the election would be fraudulent. And one thing I did learn, though, that I hadn't really known before was that Roger Stone, who is one of Trump's sketchy cronies, had dreamed up the slogan "Stop the Steal" years beforehand in Trump's primary and also during the 2016 elections. So even the name of the rally, "Stop the Steal," was something that had been in that scene for a while.
Right.
But anyways, the outcome of the election wasn't looking good for Trump even before November 4th. So doing what he is good at, if I'm giving him a little credit, he pumped his toxic spew and nonsense into the world. And I would like us to come back to this a little later because I want us to really pay attention to how a narrative was spun and sold to a large swath of the population. Because to me, this is really an interesting area for you, coming from your psychology background, to explore. But right now, we're going to focus back on Election Day. And so despite all the major news that declared President Biden triumphant in the November 4th, 2020 election, Trump and his ilk designed a coup. Sloppily organized, but a coup nonetheless. And the toxic spew I mentioned before was clearly a part, but there were actually a lot of other players and movers and moves in this sloppily organized coup. So the first part of this plan that they implemented starts with the firing and hiring and placement of key people in key places. So I'm going to walk through this. And again, the source material is linked. It's really interesting to read through it. And there are a lot of names that I'll mention, and I'll try to connect the dots here. But the first thing was that this is post-election. On November 9th, Trump fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and replaced him with Christopher Miller. It is important to understand why this matters. The Secretary of Defense basically controls the nation's armed forces and reports directly to the military's commander-in-chief, who happens to be the president. Christopher Miller was a retired army official who also played a role in Trump's presidency in 2018 and 2019, basically as a strategy and policy advisor person. So, he was a part of that scene already. At the same time, the Department of Defense places former GOP political operative Michael Ellis to be the top lawyer at the National Security Agency. Ellis has been counsel to other Republicans and Trump prior to this placement. Miller, the new Secretary of Defense, then starts to place Trump loyalists into the Department of Defense. So this is kind of suspicious, right? And this plays a really important role later in the story, so just stay with me here. So all throughout December 2020, Trump is tweeting the same tune of rigged elections, and these people that are with him are continuing to conduct this sketchy stuff. So a lot's happening behind the scenes in December, but mainly Trump and his lawyers are coming up with all of these schemes to maintain power. Now, here's something I also learned in researching this. A group of supporters called Women for America First had originally planned a rally for the inauguration on January 23rd, so after the inauguration of Biden. But in December, they moved this rally to January 5th through 7th. And here's the real kicker. The Federal Election Commission, the FEC, disclosures through November 2020 reveal that the Trump campaign paid more than $2.7 million to rally organizers that represent almost all the names on that permit. So a total of 10 people, again, all of these people were on the rally permit, were shelled out $2.7 million.
Each or collectively? Okay, wow, that's a lot. So at least $270,000 a piece they were paid.
Well, they were paid different amounts, and you can see exactly how much they were paid on that BillMoyers.com piece that I mentioned.
Okay.
So some were paid a little bit more, and some were paid a little bit less, but essentially the Trump campaign was paying a bunch of these people who also happened to organize the Women for America First rally. So pretty sketchy. I've also included a great Open Secrets article that details the trail of the dark money that led to the gem of this discovery. So you can actually read how they traced that money and found that these folks were paid.
Good info.
In December 2020, Trump tried to pressure acting Attorney General Rosen at the Oval Office to overturn the elections. So Trump's starting to pull out some of his hold on to power cards. So Rosen refuses, and this is going to be an important detail a little bit later. During December, Trump tweeted a bunch of bullshit, excuse my French, about election fraud, rigged elections, and just all the stuff that he had continued to say. And also he's tweeting about the rally on January 6th. All right. So January 2nd, if you recall, this is related. This is another play in the maintaining power playbook. Trump tried to pressure Georgia's election supervisor, and he was saying things like, and these are direct quotes from Trump, and I watched you this morning and you said, well, there was no criminality. But I mean, all of this stuff is very dangerous stuff. When you talk about no criminality, I think it's very dangerous for you to say that. So he's trying to pressure the Georgia's election supervisor to basically, say that the election was fraudulent. And thank goodness for a lot of people, and you'll hear about some of them who stood up and did not give in to these pressures. So he did not give in to these pressures. And actually, we found that the Oval Office called this poor guy a ton, over 18 times, from November 4th until this call on January 2nd. So they were basically harassing this poor guy. Correct. But that failed to work, so I suppose they had to move on to another plan. Well, Rosen, do you remember Rosen? He was the...
I do. I remember it very well.
This was the fellow who was the acting attorney general who refused Trump's request to overturn the elections. On January 3rd, he was threatened to be replaced with someone who was more agreeable to overturning the elections. And you can read about this. It's very obvious, all these conversations going on. So Rosen managed to, I can imagine this person thinking, how do I prevent this from happening? So he managed to join forces with other lawyers and top Justice Department lawyers who all threatened to resign collectively if he was replaced. So again, kudos to some of those people for standing up. And so he managed to keep this job after hours of debating. So this is well documented. They were in the Oval Office for hours, and Trump finally, I guess, gave in, did not replace him. Again, these things were happening January 2nd. On January 3rd, Trump replied to a #StopTheSteal tweet from one of the rally organizers saying, and I quote, "I will be there, historic day." Also on January 3rd, the Capitol Police released a warning memo that an angry mob may target Congress members. And then on January 4th, Trump is trying to hold on to his power, and he tries to get Pence to agree to overturn the elections. Pence refuses. So realizing that they aren't going to sabotage Georgia's elections results, and they're not going to get Pence to overturn the elections, they're not going to get the acting attorney general to be replaced. They're looking for other ways to pull a coup. And Renee, just recently it was revealed that a PowerPoint was circulated around on January 5th. Have you heard about this?
I did not.
Yeah, this was a day before the Capitol attack. And this PowerPoint, I just find this really funny, but
yeah, PowerPoint.
Yeah, it basically detailed different ways to stage a coup. So they like had different options. The title of this PowerPoint was Election Fraud, Foreign Interference and Options for 6 Jan. And this was actually turned over by Mark Meadows, who was the chief of staff, and he played a role in a lot of the scheming. And this is also detailed in that insider timeline that I mentioned.
Okay.
So, I mean, they had a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And
very specific.
Yeah, very, very...
very specific, very strategic, very planned, very much so.
And also, though, can I just point out that looking at all these actions that were happening between November and January, in retrospect, it seems like this was that they were unraveling and spiraling out of control. I mean, there were so many near misses here, as I mentioned, and fortunately, many people stood up and didn't allow Trump and his cronies to pressure them into doing things that are basically undemocratic, right? So like I said before, I didn't want to sugarcoat this and say it was anything but an attempted coup. Like personally, I just think that we just need to call it like it is.
Right. And that's the whole point, even for the podcast, actually saying the truth, exposing the truth, and what's usually hidden or not considered politically correct. So no, definitely keep going.
So this is all leading up, as I mentioned, to the actual day of the insurrection. So now I'd like to shift into the timeline of the day of the attacks. And, you said that you were there. So if you have any, if you want to add any input, please feel free. But this is what was documented from what I was able to research. And I'm going to highlight the main sequence of events, but we're going to shift gears and talk about some of the actual people involved in this attack, or at least, a part of the insurrection. So we can't go into every part of the day in detail, but
just the main parts. Okay.
Yeah. But everyone, I encourage, read through the details of that horrifying day, because I don't think any of us should forget that this happened just a year ago. And it is really horrifying to read step-by-step details of what happened. So the morning starts at 8 a.m. with Trump tweeting more bullshit about the elections being overturned, and Pence being the key to doing so. So remember, he tried to pressure Pence. Pence said no, but Trump is still, pushing this rhetoric. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, the rally begins. We start with our favorites, Trump Jr. and Rudy Giuliani, that are basically, both of them are inciting for something to happen, with Trump Jr. actually saying, "We're coming for you." And this is a quote. "We're coming for you, and we're going to have a good time doing it." And Giuliani saying, quote, "Let's have trial by combat." So, they're out there saying this stuff,
Right. Which were actually, like marching orders. These are people who are heavily respected by Republican learners, Republican supporters. So hearing this information is kind of like setting the emotional and psychological stage for, getting arms ready. Right.
Exactly. So this is going on around noon. Trump himself begins to speak, and he actually does so for over an hour. And again, he's touting the same kind of BS that he's been, plus more, about never giving in, that the election was a theft. And I also linked the transcript of that speech if anyone is interested in reading it, and God bless you if you are. So anyways, Trump is ranting and raving for over an hour, and meanwhile, some of the crowd begins to start to swarm the Capitol building, where Congress has convened to certify Biden's election and presidency. Pence, as I mentioned, has already refused to intervene, and he declares again that he will not intervene. And by a little after 1 p.m., the Capitol Police are on high alert, and Trump himself is actually encouraging the crowd to move to the Capitol. And, quote, he says, "We will fight like hell. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore." Mm-hmm. So the crowd does. Things are happening fast now. The crowd is swarming the Capitol. The building is being evacuated. And Renee, I didn't remember this, but there were actually pipe bombs found.
Yes, there were.
I totally didn't. That very important detail escaped me, but they were found at both the Republican and the Democratic National Committee headquarters. And this is all happening by 1:30 p.m. And instead of settling down the crowd or, say, calling in the National Guard, Trump, in my opinion, walks around in glee and delight, acting like a king for the day, happily watching while his minions burn down the kingdom. Like, I just have this image of him,
right,
like pleased with himself that this is all happening in his name. So the way it should have worked, if he was actually going to settle down the crowd or called in the National Guard, Trump or the Defense Department could have called the National Guard to put a stop to the attack immediately. They could have simply, just by one phone call. This did not happen. Instead, the Capitol Police Chief asked the commanding general of the National Guard to deploy, but we have to rewind a couple days, because several days before, the same general was given restrictions that required him to actually ask for permission from Army Secretary General McCarthy to do this. And this was not normal. And
Correct.
Remember how I mentioned, all of those people being replaced in the Department of Defense? Well, this is how we can tie those things back to this.
Right. This was part of the premeditation for this strategy.
Exactly. So from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m., the attackers, the insurrectionists, break into the Capitol building. They threaten, they destroy, and, the Capitol staff and members of Congress are literally hiding for their lives. Like, I just want to pause for a minute, Dr. Renee. I cannot imagine this moment, even though I watched it unfolding and we saw live streams.
Yes, it was definitely very terrifying. Lives were at risk, and they really knew that their lives were at risk because they were already seeing actual blood on the floor. You can hear words of taunts and ranting. So it was a very imminent threat of loss of life.
Yeah, and I just imagining people crouching behind their desks, wondering what's going on out there. Why is this even happening?
Right.
I just, and then thinking about the Capitol Police who were out there putting their bodies on the line. And from all the stuff that I read, they just showed tremendous amount of bravery in that movement. I just think
without a doubt.
Yeah. So, going back to this, the Capitol Police Chief has already requested the National Guard. Nothing's happening. It took the literal moving of mountains to get help from the outside beyond the Capitol Police. This is wild to me, but a senior advisor to Mitch McConnell had to call outside. So he's on his phone calling a personal connection, who then this person that he calls happens to put in a call to the FBI deputy director, who then finally sends 3 tactical teams to the Capitol. So it took a staffer dude to call his buddy to say, "Hey man, can you call the FBI?" What? Yeah. This is an hour into this attack.
Right.
So a lot happens over the next little bit. The Capitol Police Chief is begging for help, being denied the National Guard. The attackers are making nooses, they're using, from what I read, it was
pictures of it. Yep.
Yeah. They were taking microphone wires from news reporters and making fake nooses, and they're threatening to hang Pence with these nooses. The rioters are storming Nancy Pelosi's offices. We have a lot of footage. In fact, one of the articles I came across said this was one of the most documented criminal attacks that has been out there. So we know the National Guard is still being withheld, and reading through the material, the reasons are it's for optics' sake. So I don't even know what that means, but
So if I were on the other side doing crisis management, optics is what we talk about. Like, let's talk about controlling how it looks to the outside. So if we bring in the National Guard, if we bring in the FBI, it will look to our supporters that negatively from what we're looking for. So the optics is really what we're using for crisis management to control the visual image. So therefore, viewers, voters don't get into their minds a thought that we don't want them to think. So it's a way of kind of masking the truth by controlling what is in the news or what's not in the news.
Right. So regardless of what they were hoping to accomplish by withholding the National Guard, what was happening in reality is that the FBI SWAT teams had finally, been deployed, and staffers and Congress members were being evacuated from the Capitol building. So finally, 2 hours, this is over 2 hours after the original request for the National Guard, McCarthy approves the request. So 2 hours. But the Mayor Bowser of DC, had actually requested Virginia's National Guard. And so, you can ask for other states' National Guards, and it was actually approved. But because the Virginia National Guard would have to cross, a line, and it wasn't, they had to go,
right?
Yeah, the Department of Defense had to approve it. So guess what? It was denied.
Which, of course, that's right.
Yeah. So this goes on a while, and there are more requests and more denials, and it's going back and forth. And of course, in the meantime, Trump is tweeting away and sympathizing with the attackers, saying, I quote, "I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us."
Right.
So 3 hours after all the shit hit the fan, the National Guard was finally approved to deploy. And they had been ready. They had been ready for a long time, but it took 3 hours. And then we can fast forward a little bit. The Capitol was secured by 8 p.m. So,
Right. Good timeline.
Yeah. And I just wanted to note here that the Capitol police officers took the brunt of this attack. So many of them got COVID. So it's hard to think back, but this was before we had vaccinations. This was, a lot of the people at the rally were refusing to wear masks and things like that. So the Capitol police officers, many of them got COVID. Over 140 of the officers were injured. One officer, Brian Sicknick, died from sustained injuries as he defended against the attack. And sadly, 2 officers committed suicide after the attack.
And I also remember one of them, his eyes were poked out. One of his eyes was poked out. He lost his sight, so now he's on disability.
Yeah, and like I said, over 140 of those officers were injured, and many different types of injuries. Again, this is from being attacked. So, Dr. Renee, after hearing about the attack on the Capitol and witnessing what we did on that day a year ago, I was hoping that we could hear your take on the people who participated in the rally and the riots. Okay. And I wanted to note that I couldn't find a definitive answer to exactly how many people attended the rally, or definitively how many people actually swarmed the Capitol, because I think there is a distinction. But at this time, at this point in time, we do know that 675 people have been charged with a crime. Yeah. So what is your take on that?
Well, I think if we look at how this started, like the psychology of how it started, so thinking about like the groupthink mentality. So in order for previous President Trump to even have this ability and to have this control and power, he was able to leverage and capitalize on the mentality and the fears of people who, looking back, really were resentful of a Black man being the president. And so they did not like Barack Obama being president. Trump worked feverishly to try to discredit Barack Obama's actual legitimate winning of the campaign and of the election. And so starting that campaign, in his head years ago before he even ran for office, and then Trump, of course, is in office, he still is negatively regarding the previous president, Barack Obama's, tenure and any efforts that he made. And he also aggressively sought to undo any of the growth or progress that Obama had made. And so what a lot of people who were buying into Trump's rhetoric were believing is that it all started with having a black man in charge of a white empowered country. And so by consistently having the thought and saying that our way of life is being stolen, then you're then creating a backtrack psychologically of people thinking, okay, we need to protect ourselves. We need to take back what was stolen from us. And so then, of course, when Trump is actually in office, and then when he didn't win again, he's continuing with the verbiage of this was a steal. So whoever was on board with him before, who believed that Barack Obama was the beginning of the country being stolen from them, and that Biden, who was also Barack Obama's vice president, is a continuation of this steal, they now have this ingrained belief system that we have to protect ourselves and protect our country at all costs because this was stolen from us, and our very life, our very way of living is being threatened. And so we must act, and we must act aggressively. So that whole thinking, go ahead.
What exactly, in your opinion, is being stolen?
Well, in my opinion, nothing was being stolen. But right. If you look at people, nothing was being stolen from me, of course, because obviously I'm a black female. And so my views might be different from persons who are not black female and who are not being, a victim or a circumstance of systemic long-term oppression and refusal of resources. And so, but if you look for people who are used to having the benefit of systemic oppression, people who are used to benefiting from just their skin color being white, being able to cause them to have more power and more privilege, if you would then now have a black president who is like, okay, no, we're not going to continue with, status quo, then they could feel as if they were losing their way of life, as if they were losing their power. And that really is like the core of why they felt so justified to act, because they honestly believed that they were being threatened, that their power was being usurped, and that they must not only act, but act quickly and aggressively to regain that control. I do want to interject that there was a January 2020 psychological survey focusing on the belief systems and the thoughts of people who actually supported the riot or the insurrection. And 51% of the Republican voters who voted believed that there was a traditional way of life, of American life, was being threatened, and that they, again, must act aggressively and with force to take it back. So 51% of the Republicans who actually endorsed this are saying we need to act aggressively. That's at least half of the Republican, respondents who are saying we must act with force. So again, not every Republican agrees with what happened, but for the riot itself to happen, if they were being fed, spoon-fed repeatedly, that we must take back our way of life is being threatened, then they're going to not let go of that thought, and they're going to respond to what their person in power is saying. Go fight and go attack.
Right. And given that all of the other options of trying to usurp power did not work. Correct. This was the only option apparently left, right? Is that
right? So we couldn't take it by political force. We couldn't use political connection. We couldn't even have our vice president side with us. So now it's up to us. Now we must use hands to physically, violently take back control.
Wow. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. How about we talk about some of the specific people
Okay.
that were involved. So as you know, we decided to title our show today, How Domestic Terrorists Are Taking Over Our Country. Now, of course, that is a reference to the attackers on the Capitol. But we're going to go into actually some of the people that participated either through their attendance at the rally and participation in the riots, or documented calls for violence, or false claims about what actually happened at the insurrection. And these people specifically are actually people who have been elected into political positions or are running for political positions. So I do want to highlight, and I mentioned this before, but there were a lot of people who attended that rally that were not a part of the attacks. So,
Correct.
I'm an activist. I have participated in a lot of marches and rallies. And, if something were to happen at one of those where it turned violent, I wouldn't want anybody to automatically assume that I would also participate in the violence, right? So I think it is really important that we do make a distinction that some people did show up because they genuinely love and support Trump, and and going through some of the things that you talked about before. I'm not saying I agree, but
you can understand.
I can understand that you show up because you have a belief and you have a strong feeling, and you feel called to action, so you show up to support, But I also want to be very clear that, as I mentioned before, there were clear signs that violence could occur on this day. So there were warnings out there, and just as there are currently warnings of violence that could happen on election day of 2024 if Trump isn't elected again. So I've linked some articles to a couple of pieces that talk about and detail actual people who are saying these things. So it's not even just a warning without some kind of substance. There are actually people out there saying this stuff, and this
making
is even
the threats. Okay.
Yeah, making the threats even now. As I said, we're going to focus today on specific people that are elected officials or are candidates running for office who participated in some form of violence, be that verbally through social media rhetoric, or actually on the day of the insurrection, or, just pushing this propaganda about taking up arms and fighting, shooting, whatever. We're not going to have time to share all the names, so we've included links to a couple of articles that identify many of the individuals that are running for office, and actually 57 elected officials who were in attendance that day. So just to, important to be informed.
That's correct.
So I'm going to go through, that's why we're here. So I'm going to go through and just talk about, I have, just a sampling of some of these folks. So the first one is Mary March, who was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in March of 2021. Mary March owns 2 barbecue restaurants in Christiansburg, Virginia, and she was quoted saying that Trump supporters would, quote, fight and shoot and defend and die for their beliefs and life experiences. She, too, was willing to, quote, fight and die for her family and small businesses, but she denies that she was a part of the actual riots, and she just simply attended the peaceful rally to hear Trump speak. But as we can see, she clearly believes that she and others should fight and die for this cause. So again, she claims she wasn't at the rally. At the riots. I don't think there's any proof saying that she was in attendance at the violent riots, but she is pushing this propaganda. So she was elected in the Virginia House of Delegates. Another Virginia House of Delegates, that person that was reelected, is David LaRock, and he was reelected in March of 2021. He also claims that he had nothing to do with the riots and only attended the rally, though I've read reports that say he actually did indeed march to the Capitol. We just don't know how far he actually made it there. So while he claims he was only at the peaceful part of the rally, there is some evidence that he actually marched toward the Capitol. And again, he was a sitting elected official at the time that this happened. So he also suggested so I wanted to also include people who like were kind of denying that any of this happened. So he suggested that the violence was made up and that people were actually paid to provoke protesters, which we know to be false, completely false. And another thing, and I just wanted to include some of this toxic stuff. He responded to the criticism by an NAACP member. He suggested that instead of criticizing him, they should be focused on the, quote, needs of the colored people. Mm-hmm. And he claims later that he deliberately used the word colored because that word is an NAACP acronym. Okay, dude, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
It just, I don't even need to say anymore. So those two are in the Virginia House of Delegates, and they're currently serving terms. Another one is Susan Iani, and I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly, but she's a town council member in Natick, Massachusetts, who was actually arrested for her part in the riots. So she was there, and she was arrested. And she's still also a town council member in Natick, Massachusetts. She also, before any of that stuff, we know that she's local in a local far-right anti-LGBTQ group called Super Happy Fun America. So nice, Suzanne. There's also a picture of her posing with a thumbs up next to a dude with a Proud Boys t-shirt on in a bus headed toward the Capitol that day. So very stand-up citizen there. Then we have Matthew Lynch in Braintree, Massachusetts. Now, this one is a really interesting one because he was actually elected into a school committee seat there in Braintree, but he was fired from his teaching position for his part in the Capitol attacks. So he was fired as a teacher, but he was elected as a school committee seat member. So he also, in addition to all of this other garbage, he has over a dozen complaints against him for alleged transphobic comments he made. So on the one hand, good thing he isn't in the classroom. On the other, he is 1/6 of the decision makers in that school district.
Even more damaging.
Right. At least he's only a 6th, but I don't know anything about the other 5/6 of those school committee people. So on to our last example. We have Danielle and Stephen Lindemuth from Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. This is a married couple, and they were collectively at the rally. So there's no evidence of them being a part of the attacks. Okay. But these two do deserve a mention because they have a clear far-right agenda, such as keeping critical race theory out of the schools, and they've also said bigoted things online. And, you know, they are on the school board at the Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. Okay. So I'd like to mention that there are already people, like I said before, talking about taking up arms to fight in this country in 2024. And as I mentioned, there were 57 elected officials who attended that rally. We don't know concretely how many of those were a part of the riots. All of that is still ongoing. There are ongoing investigations, as we know. So.
Okay. I do want to say that when we mentioned Marie March and who was elected, the VA House of Delegates, as well as David LaRock, if you can listen to what they're saying, they're really trying to tiptoe or stay on the line of, yes, I'm a Trump supporter, but I also want to keep the voters who are anti the riot still on my pocket. So on one hand, yes, I'm saying we should fight, but no, I wasn't really a part of it. So they're really trying to play both sides and to still get elected. And obviously it worked. So you're saying just enough to get people who still want to support Trump, but don't want to be associated with his divisive and aggressive and violent, activity. So that's one way they were able to win, just from their messaging alone. And then for people who are actually like blatantly supporting it, then they're focusing on mainly just garnering the support of very pro-Trump voters and Trump loyalists, and using that only as their campaign message. And I really think it's interesting, as someone who does help with political messaging, that for some of the people who are winning and they are acknowledging their involvement, or they're acknowledging their support of violence and the right to die for your beliefs, they're twisting words of fighting for our rights and the truth, so that way they can capitalize on these emotionally solid words to get people to vote for them. Yeah, we should focus on the truth and we should focus on fighting for our rights, but not recognizing that they are being beguiled and tricked into not knowing the whole message of what actually has happened. And it just always, is seemingly lately that everyone is focusing on how to out-Trump the other Trump candidates or Trump-backed supporters, so that they can then be more of an ideal person to be elected into office. So those are just a few things I wanted to add in there, Dr. Olysha.
Yeah, thanks for adding that in there. And I mean, I just wonder, why do people still continue to believe this rhetoric, vote for people who clearly believe this rhetoric that is, in my opinion, threatening our democracy? Why, when we have all the evidence that the election was not rigged, I'm having a really hard time understanding.
Well, yeah, we have to first look at, there's a psychological phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. And what that means is if you believe one thing, then you'll believe the next thing that's associated with your original belief. And the more and more of these little beliefs that you garner up, then the more likely you're going to stick to what you've done. So we just had the holidays. You might have gone out and bought, for example, a large screen TV. And it's $100 over your budget. So you already compromised by saying, okay, my budget was this amount of dollars, but now I'm going to spend an additional $100 because it's on sale. So the sale was the one justification. Then you get to the register and they tell you, oh, well, for just, $100 more, you can have an extended warranty. So then you justify saying, okay, well, I guess it's only $100 more to protect what I've already spent over my $100 original budget. So the more and more you compromise, the more and more you're willing subconsciously to continue to make more acquiesces or to be more justifying of your subsequent behavior. And it's the same thing for in relationships. Think about domestic violence. Okay, well, the person hit me once and I forgave them because I really believe that they're going to not do it again. So the person hits the victim a second time. Okay, well, this time it was only because I did this or I did that, or they were really, really upset. So the more something undesirable happens, the only way that you can justify and to decrease your psychological stress and anxiety is by making another justification. And this is what's happening with Trump supporters, the very avid ones. We believe that he should have won. We voted for him. So since we voted for him, it's because we believed he should have won. When he didn't win and he's telling us that it was because it was stolen, then we have to, for our own sense of safety, also agree, well, maybe it really was stolen. And then the more and more you support him, the more you're going to be resistant to anyone saying anything negative about the person that you support. And no matter how crazy the person may behave, because of cognitive dissonance, you are going to keep on believing more and more craziness, because if you accept that this one thing is not true, then you would have to then also backtrack and go over all the other things that you believed and then question, well, maybe that wasn't true as well, or maybe that was not right, or that was not fair, or that was not appropriate. So in order to keep believing your original thought and to justify your original actions through cognitive dissonance, you keep accepting more and more and more of what has happened. And then when it comes to, voter psychology and understanding how that happens, there's a thing called collective psychological empowerment. And when voters believe that they have an actual win, they believe they have been empowered. When they believe they have lost, they have a feeling of disempowerment. So imagine you're feeling disempowered because all election, regardless of who you vote for, if you're person one, you now have a psychological sense of power and a sense of purpose, and you believe that you're able to then make a change. When you lose, you then feel as if all those things were taken away from you and you don't have any more empowerment, and you feel as if there's a sense of hopelessness and a lack of power and a lack of possibility. So then when you have these results showing that President Trump did not win, you have repeatedly backed him, voted for him, disregarded the things that may not have been appropriate or safe to say, but you're now believing in these things. So not only do you feel as if when he lost that it was an injustice to your own voting psychology, but now someone's also telling you, well, no, you're powerless and you have a sense of low possibility, not because someone legitimately lost, but because now that loss was an injustice in and of itself. And so that injustice creates a self-defined injustice where people are now thinking, okay, well, now we have our own sense of justice and a sense of injustice, and now we must take our own actions into our own hands to make our decisions to correct the injustice in our own version of justice. So that's how these things keep happening. And that's how it seems more and more crazy and incredulous. Like, okay, well, how can they keep believing that? Well, it's because they made small and small compromises from the beginning. And then it became so big that now there's no way I can come out and say I'm against Trump, because that would mean I would have to then question my own validity, my own sense of person, my own sense of intelligence by agreeing to all the other previous things that I voted for or supported.
So it's like basically doubling down. Like
Correct.
I've committed to this. I believe it in, whatever, even if there's evidence contrary to what I believe. I don't believe that evidence because it's coming from people I don't trust.
That's correct. And if you're also someone who has either very discriminatory thoughts and behaviors or even racist beliefs, then it's going to be easy to feel as if, okay, well, I don't really believe all about what Trump is saying, but I do know I didn't like having a black president. I don't like how everyone's talking about how people who are not black or brown or minorities are now the bad guy. And so he is, meaning Trump is being extreme, but I'd rather support him than to support the other occurrences or the other beliefs that if I don't do this, then I'm going to completely lose my way of life and my sense of power.
Wow. So, I mean, hearing all of that, it seems to me like there are some really deep rooted and embedded problems. And, a part of our show is to provoke our listeners into action.
Exactly.
So, I was thinking about what are some specific areas of action that people can take based on what we talked about today.
Okay. Well, let's take a little snapshot about how the riot became the insurrection, or the rally became the riot, became the insurrection. So all of that starts from a theory called contagion theory, like a contagious disease. So it's a contagion theory as well as groupthink. And what these psychological theories show us is that whenever people are in crowds, they are more likely to lose their individuality and to just go along with what the group is saying or doing so they can be part of the group, to not be rejected, and to also have a sense of acceptance and a sense of group power. Because, again, whenever two or more are gathered, there's more and more power in that union. So imagine you're in this like crazy riot and crazy rallying. And so the reason why you can do that is because you believe in a sense of survival. So in order for us to correct what's happening, whenever you're in a group, especially when it's one that's politically heated, to deliberately ask yourself, am I following the group because I'm afraid of being rejected? Or does this group truly represent what I think and what I believe? So use that as your first and foremost thought whenever you're in groups that are becoming politically heated. Where do you truly, truly stand? And be courageous enough to ask yourself that question and to be okay with saying, well, you know what? I think I didn't want to be rejected, or I felt fearful for my life or my lifestyle. And so I just went along so I could have that group protection. So ask yourself those questions first. So one, focusing on having the thought whenever you're in a group that's politically heated, asking yourself, do I really believe what the group is saying or what they stand for? Or am I letting fear and my survival instincts motivate me to just accept what they're doing? And the second thing, it's also important to not only have honest conversations face to face, but to be able to support free press or expert-based news, and not just news conglomerates that are having a very fed to them message. So, the third thing would be is to support free expert-based and real experts, not fake experts, real expert-based information and truth, so that you can make your own informed decision, which is one of the reasons why we're even here, to provoke these conversations and to expose the truth. So not only listening to some of the things that we're saying, but looking at the research that you, Dr. Olysha, is providing, so you can make your own informed decision and not just being corralled into groupthink and not thinking for yourself, so you can make the best actions. And then I do want to say as one more thing is to become a deliberate anti-authoritarian supporter. And authoritarian is when you have the belief that you should just submit to one person, one way of thought, or one way of a political group or a small group of elite leaders, what they're thinking and what they're doing. If you just blindly support these people, that's also supporting authoritarianism. When you support authoritarianism, you are then giving away your freedom for personal choices or your freedom of personal thought. And then you're going to then be likely to then be caught up into the group think and the contagion thinking, where you're like, okay, well, I just have to just be with what my group is saying, regardless of how correct or how crazy it may be.
And I ran for office in 2018. I guess a part of why I ran for office wasn't just because of Trump. I'm in a state where there's a lot of this stuff has been going on for a long time. So I guess one of my suggestions to provoke our listeners is to encourage those listening to run for office. I mean, everywhere in the country there is some seat that is open or that is not competitive. Like for the case of Danielle and Stephen Lindemuth, who I mentioned in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, Stephen Lindemuth had an open seat. There was no one even running against him initially.
Right.
Eventually a Democratic candidate got into the race who lost by just a couple hundred votes. But both of them were able to just glide right into those really important school board seats with no opposition or little to no opposition, and all evidence showing that they are bigoted people who have, very, very extreme beliefs. And, there are seats like that all over that are either just not, people aren't running in them, or, it's basically complacency, I think, a lot. And also, right. Even if so I know that there's also seats that, especially now where, I'm in Florida, there are seats that are not even that competitive. And we're going to talk about this coming up soon. But even if a seat isn't super competitive, when you run, especially if it's you're the only Democrat running, or you're the only, person who's in your political camp running, you force your opponents to spend money.
That's right. Very true.
So when they spend money against you, they're not spending it on their own campaign. So, even if it doesn't feel likely that you'll win a seat, and I know that seems kind of funny to walk into something like that, but it does in a way force some dialogue and force the opponents to spend their money.
And it also can help you to just clarify your own sense of purpose and your own sense of impact. And whether you win or don't win, it might just be more information to then run again, or to be able to leverage the information and the connections and support that you were able to obtain to then do something even bigger and even greater. So nothing is a waste from running for political office, because you still increase awareness and you also expand your potential.
Exactly. And there, we talked about, these plans to stage this coup, and this is on a national level. It's very high profile. But in every state and in every community, there are people planning how to take power. I mean, it's just happening. So, whether I know a lot of people people even that I consider very like-minded to me sometimes say I stay out of politics. Politics is I don't trust it. It's so we got to change that culture. I think making sure people are aware of local politics and national politics, and educating friends and family about what they learn, and also just showing up, right? Like vote. In my community,
even if you don't run, just vote.
You're right. In my community,
primaries and general elections.
Well, even locally. So like we have maybe 10% people in our community show up for local elections. So city commission seats, school board seats. 10% of the people are deciding the fate of local politics. And you may not think that local politics are that important, but that's how everything is running, So
that's correct. And local politics is what sets the beginning for which schools are funded, how much money is going to which communities, even your groceries shopping, which stores are even allowed to take root in your community, where you can have electrical outlets even being established, or wiring for the cell phone towers. So it's very important to understand that every election, every opportunity to vote is a chance to have the lifestyle, the family, and the community that you want in ways that are meaningfully supporting you as a voter, by helping to make the decisions and who's making those decisions. So definitely everyone always vote, make it a fun day to do, and also use it as your sense of power. Well, anything else before we close, Dr. Olysha?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think this was a lot of fun. How about you?
Yes, it was great. It was really fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm very happy about being part of a smart podcast, smart information, unbiased, unbought, so people can actually come to us, get information. Very much looking forward to our live conversations. So everyone definitely follow us on social media, on Instagram, on Twitter. Join us on the podcast so you can be part of our conversations. We want to hear what you have to say as well. This is part of the conversation. So definitely I'm very, very excited. And I'm excited to have you as my co-host.
Me too. And also don't forget to check out our website, PROVOCATIVEConversationspodcast.com. I'm looking forward to our next conversation, where we're going to talk about who is Jerry and why is he mandering.
Right, I know. Yes, that'll be great. Yes, can't wait for the conversation on redistricting and gerrymandering next week. And just a reminder, wherever you get your podcast, make sure you leave your reviews, your comments. And again, check out our website for all the links to all the source material and other resources that are based on science and expertise, not opinion. Well, thank you again for listening to Provocative Conversations, and we are your provocateurs. I'm Dr. Renee.
And I'm Dr. Olysha.
Be informed, be entertained,
be provoked. All right. Whew. We're done, right?
Okay, yep. Okay. Good.